In November 2019, I gave a talk at a comedy club in Providence as a part of a stand-up science show presented by comedian Shane Moss. He also produces the Here We Are podcast. And the format of the show is a couple of local scientists stand up and talk about their research, and then Shane and a local comedian do some stand-up that's usually related to science. So we're combining humor, science, and drinks, which is really fun. It's a picture of me waiting in the green room, which was pretty cool, I have to admit. And then a picture of Shane doing his comedy stand-up routine in front of the Learning Scientist logo. The talk that I gave at the comedy club last November was called To Learn, Retrieve. And I love this talk because it is really getting at the essence of the fact that in order to learn information, we really have to be able to retrieve it. Retrieval is the key to learning. My research and the research of those who apply cognitive psychology to education is all about taking the building blocks of how our minds work. So understanding our memories, understanding attention, understanding perception, and then building learning strategies and teaching strategies on top of those. So we're not just making strategies up from scratch. We are actually taking what we know about how our minds work and then building learning strategies and teaching strategies on top of them. And then we test them to make sure that they actually work in educational settings. And what I found both as being a student and as an educator myself is that students are really, really worried about trying to get the information into their heads. I love this picture because it really just shows that this kid is trying to cram as much as they can into their minds. And students do tend to worry about this. They worry a lot about getting the information in, but they don't worry nearly enough about getting the information back out. And getting it back out is extremely important. That's a retrieval, retrieving information or bringing it to mind. Now, we do engage in retrieval when we're in school, when we're in college, and usually really throughout our time in school, we take tests or quizzes or exams. And when we engage in those, we are practicing retrieval. We're bringing information to mind. But we usually view those times of retrieval as assessments. They're neutral. They're just measuring learning. That's how we view them anyway. But in reality, they are not neutral. We're not just measuring our learning when we retrieve information. We're actually making it stronger, making it more durable. Retrieval practice, or bringing information to mind, affects learning in a few different ways. Some of them obvious, and then some of them not so obvious. The more obvious ways are indirect methods, indirect effects of learning. When you retrieve information, it gives you feedback of what you know and what you don't know. And this allows you to allocate your study time more effectively. It can be motivating. But what's really, really cool and my favorite is that bringing information to mind directly affects learning. In other words, that act of remembering something literally directly makes it stronger. And it makes it easier to remember later, but it also makes it easier to apply in new situations. Now, I've been doing this research since I was an undergrad at Purdue University. And throughout my time, I've looked at the direct effects of retrieval and the indirect effects. I've mostly studied college students, but when I was in my PhD program, we were trying to start to apply this strategy to younger kids. Now, we know how cognitive psychology works. We have a pretty good idea of how our memory and our learning work, although we are always learning new things. We're always updating what we know about the mind. But we know that little kids, while they may process information differently, they're not on a completely different planet. So in theory, retrieval practice should have worked just as well with younger kids. And when I started doing this research with fourth graders, that's what we thought. We thought, okay, we can give college students portions of their textbook, have them read, and then have them write out what they can remember. So we just have to give fourth graders a portion of their textbooks. As long as the material is relevant for fourth grade, then it'll be just fine. So we took a little passage from the fourth graders that we were working with, their textbooks, and we had them read. And then we gave them a blank sheet of paper and we said, okay, write down everything you can remember. And looking back, I don't know why we thought this would work. It was actually a bit of a disaster. The kids really hardly remembered anything at all. In fact, there are 30 ideas in this entire text. I'm only showing you a portion of it. And the kids, on average, remembered a little more than 2 ideas. This is not very much at all. And there was actually one kid, I remember when I was collecting the data, I was watching this kid write and write and write. And I thought, oh, finally, one of them is retrieving. One of them is doing it. And they were writing. And then as I was collecting the papers, I noticed that it said something to the effect of, this passage was about clouds. I'm going to tell you about my cat. And then the rest of it was all just a story. Now that kid, even though they hardly wrote anything at all about clouds, actually did get one idea. The passage was in fact about clouds. So you get one idea just for the title. Really not a whole lot was retrieved. But knowing how our minds work, knowing that these kids should not be just on a different planet, that fourth grade shouldn't mean that retrieval doesn't work at all. We went back to the drawing board and realized that the younger kids probably needed more scaffolding. They probably needed more structure and guidance through the retrieval practice. And it's not just little kids that need that. Sometimes adults need some extra scaffolding too. It just depends on how difficult the information is, how difficult the task is. So here's what we tried. We gave the kids the text, and then we would have them write out what they could remember using these prompts in a fun little map. And they could use the text while they were doing it. Then we removed the text and gave them a new map and said, now try to retrieve the information. And now they're able to try to write out what they can remember from memory. And in this way, they were much more successful. And because they were much more successful during retrieval, this led to greater learning compared to a control group that was just reading and rereading, kind of like that kid trying to funnel the information in. So now we're seeing improvements by using retrieval practice as a learning strategy. And so the key to remembering information, the key to being able to use that information to apply it in new settings, is to retrieve the information, put the information away, and bring it to mind. And we tell college students this all the time. When you're learning something, put it aside and try to remember it from your own mind. You can write it out on a blank sheet of paper, or you could do it verbally. You could explain the information to a friend, a roommate, a parent, a dog, if they'll sit and listen to you. Try to retrieve it. Try to bring it to mind. Then check your answers, figure out what's missing, and redo it all over again. Continuing to bring information to mind, getting it out of your head is the key to keeping it in your head.